We're going to talk about the Gaussian reduction. Briefly, we won't go too much in the details of what the math behind the Gaussian reduction, because it's a bit over my head, and for the most part, isn't too necessary to then know how to use it. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to both mention global and local. We're going to go through example problems for them. Yeah, so I'll be demonstrating both of those for you. So in short, we'll talk about linear buckling here real quickly. Linear buckling is analysis type where we look for what kind of loading, what magnitude of load would cause our model to therefore buckle. So a structure has as many eigenvalues as this load is called, and as it does degrees of freedom. But generally, we're only looking at the lowest one of interest, since it represents the lowest load at which buckling occurs. But there may be times where you want to look at more of a global buckling, because the local mode, your model is being highly dominated by local modes because of some sort of thin structure that isn't really participating in the overall strength of the model. So we need to isolate it to more of that, or you may have this large assembly and you're only responsible for a small section of it. I usually imagine something like the A column or the B column on a car, for example. You're not too concerned about the entire structure, but you're concerned about your particular beam there that you need to make sure isn't going to buckle. So there's a few ways you can accomplish this to find either the global or the local buckling, and that is just to ask Nastran to calculate multiple eigenvalues. And so depending on the model, a very complex model, this can be very time and disk consuming as it creates the results for all the different possible modes it may go through. And if you've got something that's somewhat symmetric in shape, it could find a lot of nearly identical modes that are in theory are really in reality identical, but they're slightly off in numbers. You could also restrict Nastran to calculate values or eigenvalues that are within a range of values, but you kind of need to know in advance where your eigenvalue might end up in that range, and that could take some trial and error to figure out. And and probably the easiest way to do it, in my opinion, would be this Gaussian reduction. And that is to tell Nastran to only solve a specific subset of degrees of freedom using the ASET. This is also known as static condensation. You can find out more about the Gaussian reduction in your Nastran user guide at chapter 10. So a little bit about the ASET and how that works. Nastran partitions the model into multiple sets of degrees of freedom. It starts with all the degrees of freedom of the model, called the G set, and starts removing them as based off of additional sets, such as your constrained or your MPCs. And after all of this is done, you're left over with what is called the analysis set, or the A set. And these are the degrees of freedom that you are solving for. By default, that's all of the degrees of freedom not constrained, but we can reduce this further with some manual definitions. Now keep in mind that reducing isn't constraining the other degrees of freedom. We're just telling Nastran that it doesn't need to solve for them, and that we're only interested in the results for this particular set of the model. So in SimCenter 3D, there's a couple ways you can go about defining your solver sets, or it's called degree of freedom sets. In SimCenter 3D, you can, in the tree, you'll see the option for solver set. You go with right click, go new, and go degrees of freedom set. Or during the analysis, when you're setting up the solution, you'll see in the bulk data under analysis set, this is where you'll have to go to define it or assign which analysis set you want to use, but you can also click on that to then create your new degree of freedom set. So let's jump right into a demonstration, because that's much easier to understand than just talking about it. So I've got a couple of models right here. Let's start off with this model here. We've got a nice, everything, 3D visualizations turned on for the beams. I don't believe it's on for the shell, but the shell is very thin. We're looking at something that's around, the model's in inches. This is about 2 inches tall, and these are about 0.06 inches thick. So if we were to visualize this, we would not see much there, as you can see here. So we got this very thin structure overall for the skin, and then our primary structure is based upon these beam elements. These are all beam elements. That's just how that has been, visualization has been turned on to them, and they are visualized as solid. So first off, let me demonstrate to you. Oh yeah, there's it's constrained on either end, and we've got a force compressing this, so we get our buckling. So let's first just take a quick look at the just a straight run and see what happens. And we're going to create the solution there. We'll go okay. We're just going to call this full model buckling. Make sure I'm not overwriting my, got some save analysis just in case something goes wrong. Okay, so now we have our full modeling. Let me add our force here and our constraints. Okay, so now we've got our model fully defined here. There's not much you need to define for a buckling analysis. We can take a look in here if you want to define the number of modes that we want to deal with. Right now it's set to 10. I can set this up to, I'm going to set this up to 15, and we'll see if we can get results that I might be able to reference in the ASET analysis when we do more of our global buckling. We've got everything there defined. There's not much else that we need to mess around with. The setup, everything else needs to be default. It should solve really quickly here. There we go. Take a quick look. Yep, ran fine, no fatal errors. Let's close out all these dialog boxes. Let's take a look at our results here. So this is our full model buckling. And we've got a lot of small modes here, or less than one. Let's take a quick look at our first one here and see what it is. It is that skin. That skin has decided to buckle, but it doesn't look like the overall structure has buckled. And we could skip ahead here. Let's take a look at this one. Still, it's more on just the skin. I can guarantee you that the rest of these are going to just show slightly bit different variations in this outside edge buckling. But that doesn't seem to this isn't very useful information for us. The main beam structure itself seems to be completely intact. So let's take a look. Let's go back and do that reduction and see about finding our global mode here. So like I said, you can find your ASETs. You can create your ASETs here in the solver sets. You can right click there, go new, degree of freedom sets. We're going to call this our beams only set, or I'll call it, sorry, beam only ASET. We're going to select all the degrees of freedom here, even though I have experimented with this on like a shell model, shell only model that has, shells only have 5 degrees of freedom. I've selected all 5, but it will still, it kind of errors on you if you try to do that way. So I find that just selecting all 6 degrees of freedom is the safe bet there. I'm going to rotate this over so I can find the features here that we're going to select. Let me get here to selecting what we want. We want related nodes. There you are. And we're going to look at polygon edges. So we're just going to select all these features right here that should correspond with all the beam elements that we had, our reinforcements. Looks like I got everything. See, that should be all associated with our beams there. Click OK. And click, we can see everything that we got. There is a problem with this if we just try to continue from here. Remember, I mentioned that we do not want any of our, well, I don't think I've fully mentioned this too well, but one of the problems we can move into is we don't want any sort of nodes that are constrained or attached to a multi-point constraint in our ASET, because those will get removed out beforehand and Nastran will get very unhappy. So what we'll need to do is just remove these nodes. If you hold down the Shift key, as you select, it will deselect the items. So we've deselected those nodes. Let's take a quick look down here. Deselect, 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 because this whole edge has a constraint on it, same as that top edge. Okay, so now we've only got the nodes that are both are represented by the beam elements. They're also shared by the shell, but that's okay. And we've deselected those that are part of any sort of constraint. So I'm going to click OK here. Let's go to, let's just copy this one or clone it. So that way we get all of our loads constraints in there, and I don't have to go through setting that up. Let's just rename and call this global ASET reduction. And go into, we need to edit this. All right. So we need to edit here. We're going to go back. Bulk data, degree of freedom set is what we're looking for. And let's change this to what I call this, beam only ASET. And let's click OK here. That's it. We've defined, we've now just told Nastran to only solve for that, those particular nodes. Now, it's still loads and forces and everything still translate through the model. Everything's still applied. We're just looking for the buckling that's going to occur in those nodes. And let's see, since we copied it, it's going to be looking at 15 modes. Let's change this real quickly to just one, because that's all we're going to need. We click OK. And that should be it. Let's give it a solve. Should be quick. We do get a warning, but this is particular about, it'll automatically find the correct subcase or static subcase for this analysis. It's just not explicitly defined for it. Let's take a look at our solution monitor. No fatal errors, so we did good there. Let's take a look at our results. There we go. We've got a more meaningful looking value there. Seems more reasonable. Let's take a look at that displacement. So yeah, that is the eigenvalue that would cause the buckling of this structure overall. and we kind of neglect those tiny modes that cause the skin to buckle, because the skin isn't the primary structure of the model. So if we go back to our previous one here, even though I set it to 15, none of these get up to that buckling. They all report some tiny bit due to the skin there. There's a slight bit of participation here in this model from here, but that is primarily the skin that's being reported. So that is how you can use the ASET or the Gaussian reduction there to help find the global buckling of the model. The important buckling of a structure like this is when there are, especially when there are features in it that are very thin, they're not the intended weight-bearing structure that are dominating your results. So let's take a look at a more local buckling analysis model. I've got this beam structure here. It's pinned on the ends, and we've got a load and a gravity applied to it. We could take a quick look at the that one there. We've got some 3D visualization turned on here. You can see this is a very beefy structure here. Makes it easy. It's mostly just to make it easy to demonstrate so that the model behaves exactly where we want it. So let's go. Let's create a analysis for the entire model. So we'll go solve. Oh, no, not solve. Sorry, solution. Buckling analysis. We'll go create solution. Again, if we already had our degree of freedom set or ASET known in advance, or we wanted to create it now because we know what we're looking for, we can do that right now and there. But at this point, we're just going to do a buckling analysis, right? Full buckling analysis. We'll click OK. So again, let me add our constraint or our loads and our constraint. Let's take a look at how many modes we're solving for real quickly. We've got 10 modes, that's fine. This one will be easier to identify. When we do our reduction, we'll be able to more easily identify it among these 10 modes here. So let's solve this model now. It should solve even quicker with beam elements. Yes, super quick. Great for demonstrations. Not necessarily great at demonstrating how much time you'll save with the ASET reduction. So let's take a look at our modes. We can see here our model has some negative eigenvalues. This means that if our load is reversed, that this would then buckle. But this isn't what we're interested in. Let's say our particular responsibility is this member right here. This is what we're designing in this overly complex structure. We don't want to try to do the math to figure out what are loads and how they distribute through the model to get to this point to figure out to then solve buckling just on this structure. That would be a lot of computation, making it open and prone to error. So let's take a look at the Gaussian reduction in just solving for a local area of the model. So again, I am going to just clone this one here. Excuse me. Sorry there. Needed a drink of water. So now we've got this. Let me rename this to something a bit more useful for us. We'll call this local buckling. We've got our loads and constraints have already been copied over because we just cloned it. All right, so now we're just interested in this model. So again, we can go here. How about we'll do something a little bit different in this way. Let's go back into here where our ASET is at. And let's go new degree freedom of set. We're going to call this local ASET. I'm going to select all the degrees of freedom. Now let's select what we got, what we want here. We're going to use that same filter method, selection method, and go to related nodes. This time instead point or we're going to select the curve. There we go. Now we've got that curve selected. Now again, we're going to run into the same problem. If we were to run this as is, we're going to run into the same problem with the last model. This node is shared with a constraint, and we don't want to include that. So after the smart selection method, we click OK, and we're now back to our degree of freedom set. If we hold down Shift, hover over this, we can deselect it. This is the easiest way I found this to do in 2206. In 2212, you could select this curve and then deselect that curve, which would then remove that shared node. We'll click OK here. Oh, I've already used that name. Let's see, local buckling ASET. How about that? Wanted a space there and go OK. So there we go. It automatically filled it in. We can click OK here. And let's go back and edit here. This is going to be set to 10. We really don't need to see 10. We just need 1 again. Go OK. OK, and let's solve. Yeah, should be even quicker, though hard to measure quicker. Close out of everything. And let's take a look at our result. So there's our first mode. That's, well, our only mode we look for. Okay, we can see primarily our structure here, but you can see how the deformation translated into the other aspects of the model there. And let's take a look. Let's see if this would have shown up if we ran in the number of buckling modes we look for. Now, it may not be exact. We've got a few values here. We've got 1.8 e to the 6, or 1.8 e to the 3, or 1.806 e to the 3, and 1.807 e to the 3. And we've got a 1.808. So there could be a slight difference in these, but let's take a look at this mode. I'm pretty sure it's not this one. Oh no, it was that one. I was thinking it was a different one. My mistake. So that one looks pretty much identical, doesn't it? Except this one's also including the other one. They're buckling. I mean, this is a symmetrically loaded model. We did technically have like a line of symmetry right there, and so that makes sense that both of them would buckle, not just the one. Take a look at the others real quickly. Yeah. So what definitely was that one. The slightly bit the other higher modes. So there, yeah, that was 2 demonstrations. One of them on buckling, or sorry, no, both of them were on buckling. One was for local, and one was for global. So things to keep in mind is that you want to define the ASET for the area of interest, whether this be local, or you need to exclude thin elements that aren't contributing to your overall structure. This can dramatically help save analysis time as models get much larger, much more complicated. No need to run any excess modes to find the actual results you're looking for. And you end up only solving for what you need. I believe that brings us to our end.
Thanks for checking out our channel. If you like what you saw, make sure to like and subscribe down below so you don't miss out on any new videos. Follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter for the latest engineering news and information. And to see all of our upcoming events, please visit our website at saratech.com/events.